if all things were equal, that is the line that Ange Postecoglou repeated 6 times in his post-match interview after the defeat to Newcastle. James, Spurs are 12th in the league. They've lost 10 of their 20 league games this season. I think they've won 4 times in all competitions since the start of November. It feels like Ange Postecoglou should be under a lot of pressure. Is he?
Yeah, he is. And I think he's benefited to some extent from the fact that, Manchester United and Manchester City have dominated, have just dominated the sort of back pages and a lot of the talking, over the last sort of 3 or 4 months. Because, I was looking at the numbers on the train on the way here today, actually, and Postecoglou's last 20 games, he's won 7, lost 9. Now, you go back through the 3 managers who've lost their jobs, Conte, Mourinho and Pochettino, they've all got a worse record than that in the final 20 games before they were sacked. And Pochettino, that included the Champions League final, by the way, the defeat to Liverpool in 2019. So it just gives you an idea from a historical perspective that this Spurs are on a really bad run. Probably they're, in that 20-game block, one of the worst runs, and that quite often sees a manager get the boot. And it does feel as though every Spurs home game is a referendum on whether Postecoglou's methods can work. And you can feel it in the stands that, yes, it's very exciting, and it's exhilarating when it's good. The Chelsea game that they lost the other week, 4-3, a very, very good example. They went 2-0 up, and they look world beaters, and you're thinking, okay, this is coming together, and they're doing this with all the players that are missing. They're still committed to this, full-throated, and it's fantastic. And then they just get completely picked apart in the second half. And suddenly they're caught 3v2 time and time again, and they concede a lot of the same goals. And I think this is what is really starting to undermine Postecoglou, is that he's extremely stubborn, and he believes that his methodology does not need tweaking whatsoever. It's been successful at Celtic, it's been successful in Japan, it's been successful with Australia. I don't need to change. This is what works. Just let me finish the point. They concede the same type of goals over and over again. They get caught on the counter-attack time after time. They get caught from set pieces time after time. And when he talks about, we don't need a set piece specialist, all this talk about, and there are some clubs, and he would probably point to Arsenal as being, there's a mural of Nico Jova, their set piece coach, on the wall outside the Emirates Stadium. You could argue that's going too far the other way, right? But there's certainly been a trend in the last couple of years towards dedicating time towards set pieces, and yet Postecoglou is almost dismissive of the idea of having a specialist set piece coach. I've never had one. We don't need it. It's not a problem. You're conceding too many goals, and because of these issues, there's such easy sticks to beat him with that the football isn't good enough, and the results aren't coming to offset the long-standing and consistent problems that this team has.
Now, we're recording this episode before the first leg of the Carabao Cup semi-final against Liverpool. But between now and the middle of next week, they've got Carabao Cup semi-final first leg, FA Cup third round tie at Tamworth, which is a classic FA Cup tie, non-league team, and then they've got the North London derby next midweek. So that is a massive week for Tottenham. But what does Ange have to get out of that to avoid being in a very difficult situation by the end of next week?
Well, he's got the benefit of the fact that the second leg of the Carabao Cup isn't for a few weeks. So unless they get hammered in that first leg, it's not going to be a case of,
Which is possible.
Which is possible, but it's, that tie should not be over after the first leg, all things being equal, to borrow Ange's phrase.
Should have done that in an Australian accent.
So that's really important, because although he doesn't value that competition, and he's repeatedly on record saying we should be going for the Premier League, we should be thinking bigger, and I remember having a big exchange with him last season about Champions League qualification, and sort of saying, but is this not a good stepping stone towards building a squad? And he's saying, but it doesn't mean anything. Look at Newcastle, they got in it, did it really do much for them? And I was trying to say, well, yes, financially it did, and it enabled them to maybe accelerate the bigger picture, go after more ambitious players in the market, and just where you are as a club, as the status of the club. He doesn't see the League Cup as being something that can do that. But I tell you what, if you went to Tottenham and you polled 60,000 fans and said, do you want to win something this season? They'd take anything. It's been 17 years since they won a trophy.
It's quite a miserable kind of perspective he has, isn't it? The cups don't matter. It's about getting the Champions League. Because you're right, Tottenham fans are desperate to win a trophy. Most club fans are desperate to win a trophy. But Tottenham, because they are a club that... They're a big club that has got a tradition in the past, and they have that potential to be a big club again that wins things. But I suppose Spurs and Newcastle are the two most underperforming teams in the game. they should be winning trophies. It's not like you talk about a mid-ranking club that's never had a tradition of winning things. Tottenham have won things.
They're not in a position to pick and choose.
Absolutely.
But Postecoglou believes that they should be. He thinks that the progress that they're making, if everybody was fit, he thinks they're comfortably a top 4 team. He thinks they could be going for the league. That's where he feels they should be. But what are they? What are they at the moment? 12th?
Yep.
They're miles off it. They're obviously not going to win the league this year. They're probably not going to get in the top 4.
There's also an element there of maybe sometimes managers need to read the room. And I went to the Carabao Cup quarter-final at Spurs with you on the tube towards the stadium. Was listening to some fans talk about how they felt that Man United game was the biggest game of their season. Now, I'm sure there was a little bit of like, it's the next game and all that sort of stuff that's attached to it. But the gist of their point was that was their best chance of a trophy this season, which made the Man United game the biggest game of their season. And then you switch on the TV and listen to your manager sort of dismiss it a little bit.
It's not very good as he managing the message. I remember last season at the Arsenal or the Man City game, and he was raging at the Tottenham fans for the suggestion that Spurs might take it easy to help Man City win the league again.
And again, read the room.
Exactly, his messaging is really poor, and I don't know if it's part of an act with Ange or whether it's the real him, but it projects the image that he finds it all a bit hard going. It's like he doesn't really understand why people don't get it or don't get him. That he knows better than everybody else. His idea is the best, and if you don't get it, well, you're wrong.
I think he's had a few wake up calls like that. I mean, we're talking about cup competitions. Last season, he picked a weakened team at Fulham, and they went out
first round, wasn't it?
And there was it was August, and it was a proper backlash to that. And he was, in a strong position. The team had started the Premier League season well. He's obviously coping with the loss of Harry Kane. He'd only just come in. It's not as if people were questioning him. But I think that really knocked him there because he sort of thought, well, it's the League Cup. This isn't a priority for us. We as I say, we're at that point. We're thinking we can go and have a go at winning the Premier League. I think that Arsenal game was another big wake-up call for him where he did not read the room and he misjudged the feeling among the supporters that they genuinely would, because Spurs didn't have a lot to play for then, they would rather have lost and seen Arsenal not win the league than beat City and hand the title to their fiercest rivals. Now, obviously from a professional sports point of view, you never want your own team to lose a game. But again, it comes back to this stubbornness of this is how I do it and this is the only way I can see to victory, when actually you need to be a little bit more.
Is that because previously in Australia, in Japan, and in Scotland, he's managed the biggest or the most financially stable clubs in the league? So he's been in a position whereby he can dominate those leagues. He can dominate by the way that he plays. If he's Celtic coach, he can go to St Mirren and know that his tactics are going to win. You can't have that approach in the Premier League.
No, I think that's a very good point, and it linked to that is I was watching a video of Jurgen Klopp defending Trent Alexander-Arnold, because obviously there's been a lot of talk about Trent and his defending this week. And he talked about the way that they defend, and he got into this tactical sort of detail about, I ask him to be high up the pitch because I want us to win the ball high up the pitch. And if we do it, no one complains about where Trent is because we've got the ball. Yeah. And Postecoglou's philosophy is actually quite similar. If you look at what he does with his fullbacks, they play basically as number 10s when they're attacking. So that's why they're caught 3-on-2 at the back, because it's the two centre backs who tend to be the two that sit in. So because he doesn't feel he's got the attacking players that he needs, that's why his system is breaking down. It's not this, and you look at what you're asking those fullbacks to do, it's why they're injured. They've basically got no fullbacks because they're all out injured because they're being asked to go.
Running marathons every week.
Yeah, exactly. Sprinting every game. And I think that's why Spurs are in quite a difficult position in this window, because from a short-term perspective, they need defenders. They're short of cover on the left side of defence, both in fullback and in the left side of centre-half. They've obviously just gone and committed quite a significant sum of money to a goalkeeper who will not play when everybody's available and Vicario's back fit. But what Ange Postecoglou thinks he needs is strikers, is forward players. Because if you're winning the ball high up the pitch, you don't need to worry about whether you're playing your second choice left back so much, or whether you've got a right back, filling in at centre half, because your team is playing so well that is less of a problem. If the
ball's in their net, it's not in ours, kind of thing.
But if you look at it, it's almost perpetuating the sort of basketball style nature of their football. And that if you look at Tottenham from an objective viewpoint now, and you say what do they need in January, nobody would say another forward, because because they're shipping too many goals at the back. But this is where they are. So do they back Postecoglou and do they say, okay, we fully believe in this vision. We think you are right. We're going to go and get what you want. Or are they going to say, well, actually, we've got no fit centre-halves. We need to go and get someone short-term cover and maybe revisit this at the end of the season if he's still there.
So where do you think the fans are on this? Are the majority in favour of him staying? Are the majority in favour of him going? Do they think that there needs to be a change? Are they on board? And we've spoken a lot about how we feel like the message has maybe missed the mark a couple of times. Do they get it? Are they a little bit confused about some of the stuff he says in his press conferences? What's the feeling among the supporters, do you think?
I think that they're broadly supportive still, but I think that support is shrinking by the week.
Really?
I think that they were liberated to some extent by the style of football after watching Antonio Conte's real turgid play for 18 months, 2 years that he was there. But, you know, it's a bit like a sort of summer holiday romance. You kind of get to the end of it and you're like, you know, I want to go back to normality now. I want something a bit calmer. I think they've just got to the point where they feel, actually, although this is good to watch, I want something more than this. I want something that's a bit more meaningful. It just, yes, I'm turning up, I'm being entertained, I'm seeing 4, 5, 6, 7 goals a game. But where's it getting us?
This is Tottenham for the last 30 years, isn't it? Probably longer. Since Ozzy Ardiles was there. It's kind of...
Which is why at the start, you know, Daniel Levy doesn't speak much in public, but he spoke at a fans forum where he talked about, you know, we've got our Tottenham back, and it felt very, very early at the time. But I understand why, because it was the Tottenham of the last 30 years. It was swashbuckling, it was style, it was entertaining. They, you know, not necessarily everybody's second team, but a lot of people were quite fond of Spurs because they were always habitually good to watch. I always think of the Martin Jol team. You know, under Jol at White Hart Lane, first 20 minutes, they were some of the best football you could see in the Premier League. They blow teams away, absolutely fantastic stuff. But they didn't win anything. And really, we've got to a point where Postecoglou's always felt that his methodology delivers results. He talks about, I win in my second season. Ironically, for somebody who doesn't care about the League Cup, it's the League Cup and maybe the FA Cup that could actually save his job.
I feel a bit sorry for Spurs fans. I think I read somewhere that the second highest price season ticket in all of Europe, and eventually fans are going to want something to show for it, aren't they? For paying that amount of money, they've got a shiny brand new stadium, but eventually they're going to want something a bit more real. You know,
the training ground's phenomenal. One of the best in the league. The stadium, I think, is arguably the best in Europe.
It is.
It's absolutely phenomenal stadium. Just a pleasure from a work perspective to be able to go and sit and watch a game and work there every time you go. The problem is the team. It doesn't win. And they felt they were so close under Pochettino. They felt the winning mentality was not quite there. So they go and get a proven winner, Jose Mourinho. Doesn't work out. Okay, maybe Mourinho's, you know, not quite the proven winner he was, so we'll get another one. Antonio Conte doesn't work. I'm missing Nuno Espirito Santo out for this
because he doesn't care.
He's the best of the lot.
Because he wasn't there long enough. Although, yeah, maybe he was the winner they needed all along. But you know, it doesn't work out. Disagreements. The team gets a bit older, and that's the other thing. You know, obviously Kane's gone. Son's now into his 30s. Yeah, I think it's very difficult for Spurs fans to think of a world without Kane and Son. But you know, we are getting to a stage over the next 18 months, 2 years, where Son may not be there. And what is the new look team? What is that Pochettino team that got to a Champions League final is consigned to history, kind of once and for all?
So we're looking at Ange. Maybe he's not the issue. The reason why the fans are protesting against Daniel Levy, the guy who chooses all these managers, it's right from the top, isn't it? It's the mentality at the top. It's the priorities. It's the acquisitions. It's the signings, it's the spending, it's the appointments.
There's certainly a lot to be said for that. There's a whole podcast, you know, in that point really, that, you know, Spurs have got themselves to the brink a couple of times. I always think, you know, Harry Redknapp 2011-12 when they were going for the league and he wanted Carlos Tevez, and he got Louis Saha, and he wanted Gary Cahill and he got Ryan Nelson, and they missed out on the league. And you just thought, that's the window where you could have gone for it. And Pochettino, similarly, he talks the last sort of year or so, he talked about we need to think like a big club. He was only talking to Daniel Levy when he was talking about that.
The story about the watches, the Hugo Lloris story about the watches, is classic, isn't it? Give all the players were given watches as Champions League finalists before the game against Liverpool. Now, Liverpool would never do that. Liverpool gets to the final and lose it. They don't do anything. They get to go on the holidays. Tottenham, if they're giving watches to their players for getting to the final, they're handing out the watches before they even played the game. That shows you the mentality is wrong. It's just wrong from the very basics that you're there to win, not to have a nice day in Madrid and wear a nice watch with finalists on the back of it. You want to win this medal.